Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you once again for taking time out of your day to join us here. We're going to jump right into it. This is K2K and other kind of crazy attacks. I know the agenda was just K2K attacks. We're certainly going to spend a lot of time with them, but they kind of inspired me to add some additional content that I think hopefully you'll find interesting and useful. So with that, we've kind of gotten our hellos out of the way. As a reminder, please feel free if you have questions at any time to add them into the chat windows. We'll do our best to respond to them, as well as if you have ideas or things that you'd like to share that you think could benefit those attending. Please also feel free to put those into the chat window and we'll try to distribute them out. And lastly, as we've mentioned before, if you're ever interested in presenting a topic, please feel free to go ahead and reach out to us at info@sensato.co, and we'd be happy to host you and give you the opportunity to help others get better at what we all do in cybersecurity. So I'm going to skip some of these slides. We've covered a lot of these in our previous sessions, so I don't want to belabor them at this point. We're on our 5th session now, and then we have one more session left after today. So, you know, as always, we thought about doing this to kind of give everyone a perspective from an attacker's viewpoint, and hopefully in that, gaining that perspective allows you to sharpen and evolve your skill sets and engage in conversation, and hopefully today's session continues that tradition that we started. Seems quite some time ago, which I guess it is, probably been about 5 months since we started this program. So thank you so much for sticking along with us. For those of you that may be new, you can, or you should have, if you registered, obviously you're here, so you've registered, you should have links to all of the previous content, so you can go back and see what we presented in the past. Just as a reminder, generally to everybody, one of the hopes of this program is as we go through things, you're thinking about how this would impact your organization and what steps you could take. So kind of a just-in-time audit, if you will, of you know, thinking about, do you have the right defenses, policies, and procedures in place to support a response or a detection of an incident as we kind of go through these. So with that, let's go ahead and get ready, get into this. You know, we've talked about in the past this concept of attack violence and velocity, which is simply stated, and as a reminder, how quickly an attack is moving and the damage the attack does. In our world specifically, you know, when we think about attack violence, we're thinking about not just the violence it can do to infrastructure, such as classical IT systems, but also IoT and, more importantly, medical devices. But even beyond that, we're also thinking about what the impact can be to human life and life support. So it's important to kind of keep coming back to this. We've already examined the concept of slowing down the velocity of an attack in the last series that we did. We talked about low and slow attacks that move very slowly. And because of that, typically an attacker is able to stay in the environment for somewhere around 197 days. And that number actually, as I was doing some research earlier this week, I think we're tracking towards 220 days or so for 2022. So, you know, we've really never gotten down to zero or near zero. As the complexity of networks and systems increases and evolves, obviously this number is harder and harder to keep getting lower and lower, and it ebbs and flows up and down. So the attacks we're going to talk about today are kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. They're not going to be low and slow attacks. For the most part, they can utilize low and slow, but the ultimate objective of the attacker is, once the main attack is launched, is not to stay covert. The second thing to keep in mind here as we go through the K2K stuff is these attacks are not meant to be ransomware attacks, right? These aren't where typically the attacker is going to try to get some ransom. We'll talk more about kind of their objectives, but K2K stands for keyboard to keyboard. And as I mentioned, these are the opposite of low and slow. Now, the reason we call these K2K is that typically what we see is you have especially as we go back several years, this has become somewhat more automated, but we still have a human element here, is we see that the attack actually progresses and evolves by having a human attacker on the keyboard. And they're launching attacks, and as fast as you can defend against them, meaning you're on your keyboard, then you know, basically it's a head-to-head. They're on their keyboard typing away, you're on your keyboard typing away, and you're going head-to-head. Again, somewhat of this is now a little bit more metaphorical, but yet it still occurs. And you'll see as we go through this that there's plenty of opportunity for humans to be involved. These attacks are rare. So I don't think we've seen them in healthcare. We typically see these in the defense industry, and so much so for quite some period of time that some defense contractors actually had to create specialized teams that basically they sat around like a volunteer fire department waiting for some form of a K2K attack. So you had your SOC, and then you had a specialized team that responded to K2Ks. The SOC typically is going to continue protecting and managing the overall infrastructure, and the K2K response team would be focused on specifically fighting back K2K attacks. There is a requirement for a lot of planning and resources to pull off a K2K attack. So this isn't something typically, you know, your garden variety hacker or script kiddie is going to be doing. This is a much more organized type of attack. Now you may be wondering, well, if this is rare, why are we covering it? And the reason we cover it is because I think you can learn a lot in terms of how these attacks are put together, and would these techniques, whether we ultimately execute a K2K or not, could they be used against your organization? So I think they're a great opportunity to learn and to kind of take away some best practices about just general security and thinking about how do we defend about something like this. The other thing here is these are typically the types of attacks you would see in a cyber war scenario, where there's a very focused and targeted objective to disrupt critical infrastructure. So could we see these types of things occur in healthcare? I possibly through a cyber terrorist kind of situation. I don't think nation states hopefully would do this, but you never know. We've learned a lot of lessons in the Ukraine. The common defense to these is to air gap. Now, interestingly, we're going to talk a little more about that, and it's probably the first knee-jerk reaction is, well, let's air gap the environment if this is occurring. We'll talk about some ways where that can work and may not work for you. So we'll explore that as well. It is a viable option, but you need to understand in what context those options make sense. So with that, that's kind of the background on K2K and why we call it K2K and how they've manifested themselves. So let's talk about if we were going to pull this off, if we were all going to get together and go, let's go K2K, let's pull off a K2K attack. How would we do it? Well, the first thing we're going to do is gather a ton of intelligence, and frankly, this is probably the most amount of time that's invested into this mission is going to be on intelligence gathering. So earlier I told you that, you know, on average, attackers that are attempting to avoid detection are in your environment close to 200 days or so. You know, we may find that when we're doing or planning a K2K attack, and I think this is important to understand, we may spend 200 to 300 days, almost close to a year, gathering intelligence so that we can execute this attack in a very, very violent manner. And the sources that we're going to use are pretty common. So we're going to look at annual reports, right? We're going to look at the hospital's annual report. We're going to glean a ton of information from those. Glassdoor, the website, is a great place to go befriend people that are disgruntled and, you know, ex-employees that may not be so happy and are happy to share information over a virtual cup of coffee with someone on a social media platform. You know, job post, you know, actually I'll give you a real quick technique if you want to get stuff from people. If you ever want to target someone and social engineer them on Glassdoor. If you don't know what Glassdoor is, I suggest you go check it out. But what you do is you join and you find a way to validate, verify, or pretend that you also work for the company that this other person who's disgruntled with, you know, happens to have been at that company. So now you have misery loves company. You could say, oh yeah, I was there several years ago, or I don't think I remember you, but I used to work there, or my wife worked there, or my husband worked there, or my boyfriend, my girlfriend, they used to tell me stuff all the time about how bad it is, and hey, do you know that XYZ person? You know, oh yeah, they're a real jerk. And now you have an ally, and they can start telling you stuff like, yeah, they don't even change their passwords. Like everybody, you know, all their passwords are, you know, X123 underscore in the name of the organization. That's their admin passwords. So it's a very powerful way to gather this, but it takes time, and that's why in planning these attacks, there's a lot of venues that we're going to use. We've talked about in the past job postings and using those to fingerprint an organization. Obviously, partner websites are a great treasure trove, and talked to those in some other presentations we've done. Password dumps are a big one. We'll come back to this, but if you don't have a system or a service that can alert you to whether or not the passwords that your end users are using have been compromised somewhere by someone, you should look into that type of service. Password dumps are a huge trove of finding information. And I'll give you guys a story of a situation where we did a pen test and came across a password dump, and it was quite eye-opening to what we found. But I think it's, as the attackers, that's what we're going to look for. We're going to go find out if, and I want to be clear when we talk about password dumps, we're not so much concerned about, are your passwords for your organization dumped? Meaning, is somebody exfiltrated your Active Directory passwords or some other system or your portals or whatever you have. What we're looking for are dumps of passwords that people who work for you may have been victim of in some other website, right? So maybe they bank with XYZ Bank and that bank got breached, and your employees are using the same passwords on those banking websites as they're using on your VPNs, right, to do remote access. And that's what we're looking for. So we're not specifically in this area looking for password dumps of your credentials. We're looking for where have your employees been on the internet and have any of their credentials been dumped. And we'll come back to those of you that may be saying, well, how would you know it's my employee? We'll talk about that in a little bit. Social media, obviously, that's a huge opportunity. And I gave you an example like on Glassdoor. We can sort of call that social media, but I can do the same thing on Facebook and Instagram and other platforms where we can befriend people, get to know them, and eventually start commiserating. And so those are opportunities for engagement and intelligence gathering. Shodan, extremely powerful. I'm always surprised how often I hear that organizations don't go do Shodan searches on their own organization, see what IoT and other systems you may be exposing in the world, and then to take corrective action. But it's a huge, powerful tool for everything from figuring out what's exposed to actually accessing the infrastructure itself and running vulnerability scans and determining what ports are open. So Shodan, huge benefit. And then just running vulnerability scans on public-facing infrastructure, right? You're not going to be, typically, I don't know of many organizations that if I run a vulnerability scan on one of your external-facing systems, you're going to set off alerts because chances are you would probably be getting tons of alerts on your external-facing infrastructure and not much you can really do. The right thing is obviously just keep them patched, right? Make it a patch priority, and then even if somebody runs vulnerability scans, they're probably not going to find anything of note. But obviously, these are the tools we're going to use, and the question is, how do you defend against them? Some of these, there's not much you can do about, but you need to be, cognizant of the different vectors and avenues that can be used to start building our mission plan, right? We'll talk a little more about that momentarily. Now, what I want to point out to you in this is these are all fruitful, so we're not going to ever not do this, right? If you're an attacker and you've got a mission to go perform a K2K or possibly some other kind of attack, right? These are things we can use in different types of attacks that we're planning, but let's say we'll keep this in the context of K2K. They're cheap. We can do these rather quickly. They don't take a lot of technical skills, but we can do better than this. And so I asked my team to share some of the tools we use for sales and marketing. And the reason I wanted to show you sales and marketing tools is because from an attacker's perspective, it doesn't take a lot for me to go incorporate. Like I can go create an LLC or an LLP within a few hours, right? Or I can go to different websites like LegalZoom and a couple others that allow me to stand up companies very quickly. And so I can create a front and access, as long as I'm willing to pay, I can access a ton of online tools, which I can then use for intelligence gathering purposes. So I'm going to show you some screenshots of the tools we use, and this is not an endorsement for any vendor or not an endorsement. I just, this is, I think, really interesting and helps you start seeing how this picture comes together. So this is a tool called Definitive. It's used pretty much by all vendors in healthcare to figure out who to go talk to. And you can see in here that, it's a pretty good, snapshot of different IT executives and chief executives for different hospitals. So we don't have to spend a lot of time trying to gather who is in this hospital or not. And as an attacker, this starts to help me figure out my social engineering constructs and start to filter who I want to go after. And you can see it's linked to their LinkedIn pages and tells me when it was last updated. I get their emails, their phone numbers. So there's a ton of information here. Now, is this costly to do? Yeah, it's a pretty costly subscription service. But again, if I'm part of a more sophisticated attack group, and I think I shared with you guys in this series that the average return on investment for a ransomware attack is about 1,400%. Now, again, we're not carrying out an attack here, K2K, a ransomware attack. But if I'm able to create those kinds of return on investments, I certainly have the funding to go and subscribe to some professional tools. So just wanted to give you that, but we're gonna dive deeper into some of the other things we can look at. This is just a different tool that kind of helps us look at things broken down by departments in the organization. So if we're trying to navigate who should we target and what department are they in, we can start figuring that out. We can get information about, are they assigned to their headquarters branch? Are they assigned to a branch office? Things of that nature, right? So it just, again, it helps us to start formulating our thinking about how we're going to pull off this K2K attack and what allies and resources we can kind of leverage. Going a little bit deeper here, we start seeing photos for people, right? And again, when we're thinking about this from a social engineering perspective, all of this helps, right? It helps to get the other person comfortable. We talked about, I believe it was 2 sessions ago, on advanced social compromises and using things like neurolinguistic programming and some other things to help lower people's defenses. Well, we can do that by incorporating some of this intelligence into our script and really kind of tailoring what we say. And we become, when somebody's speaking to us on a familiar basis, in fact, we covered this in the advanced social compromising, the whole concept of mirroring, this helps us create appropriate mirrors to lower people's defenses. This here I think is real interesting and kind of a cool part of this tool. What you can see here is what my team did is they looked for people that were searching for patch management. So I want to just spend a moment clarifying this, right? So what happened is we went into the tool, one of our team members here went into our tool and typed in the word patch management. And what that tool does is it then tries to figure out who on the internet is searching for patch management. And if you look over here on the right-hand side, you can see there are 35,000 companies that are in the past week have been searching on the words patch management. And as of yesterday, there were 5,100. Now you may be wondering, well, okay, well, what's that tell me? Well, we can start looking at related topics here on the bottom right. And what happens is we start filtering in on what companies are looking for these things. Now, obviously, if you're looking for patch management, there's a reason you're looking for patch management and you're searching on patch management solutions. It's probably because you don't have patching up to date. And I think one of the big things that to take away from this, when it comes to intelligence gathering, for any purpose, when it's related to open source, this is all open source intelligence, right? We haven't done anything illegal or nefarious. When you type in a search term and that goes across the web, it's fair game. Now, I want, before people scream and like, my gosh, this is an invasion of my privacy, and I'm never using Google or Bing or whatever search engine you use. This isn't really a challenge to the search engines. I mean, some of this data may come from search engines. And I was hoping to be able to show you this demo today, but there's a tool that actually allows you to watch internet traffic, and it uses the core internet backbone, and it's watching data at that level. And so a lot of the stuff you're seeing, a lot of the stuff here that we're showing you comes from that kind of publicly accessible wildland of data that's in the cloud. It's not that somebody's selling your data. This is real time, right? We're seeing that, as of yesterday, there were 5,100 searches on patch management. We can filter that down. So, we can go one step further. And, these are organizations you could see on the bottom here. This is real-time intent, meaning these are actual searches that were taking place when people were actually doing the searches. And so you could see here that Evergreen Acupuncture in the middle was looking for a security operations center. Hometown, I don't know their full name, MD Anderson. They're searching on, somebody in that organization is searching for security operations center. It doesn't mean they don't have one, or it means somebody in the organization has, and the next step in this is now trying to refine that information. And then from there, we can use it as attackers to help construct what type of attack or threat model we want to go after. So I wanted to share this with you because there are some other tools that you can do this with that are a little more nefarious, or not. I guess that's a proper way to say it. They're meant for nefarious activity. What I want to hopefully do here is expose the fact that if somebody is really focused on developing a case, a mission against you, they're going to put in the time, and they have access in this day and age to some amazing tools, and you just need a little bit of funding to go do this and get it right. So with that, we've got our intelligence, right? We've looked at open source, we've looked at paid sources, we've got a bunch of data at this point, theoretically, right? We would have probably some output from vulnerability scans, showdown searches, soft scans. We'd probably know what ports you have, we know what jobs you're hiring for, which allows us to fingerprint what technology you're using. We may have clues as to what challenges you have if you're searching for patch management, or maybe you're searching for log4j or something else. And it's giving us insights into some of the challenges you have. And that's what we're trying to really gather here with this intelligence gathering, is really kind of figure out what ultimately we can exploit, right? Now, again, this is a much more sophisticated attack than us just coming in and trying to knock down a door or do some privilege escalation. We're taking our time here up front because we want to unleash something really devastating down the road. At this point, we're going to start doing what we call an attack model, right? So whenever I lead offensive computing efforts, I would get my team together, and literally we're going to sit around a table, or I guess virtually nowadays with the way life has changed, but we would basically whiteboard out an entire attack model. Now, the corollary to an attack model is a threat model. And I don't know how many people use threat models, so if I change from my offensive computing persona to my defensive computing persona, when I'm teaching, especially when I'm teaching classes on writing secure code, or advanced defense strategies and things of that nature, I really focus on getting people to incorporate threat models into their world. But before we go a little deeper into threat models and attack models, the thing to keep in mind here, if we were doing this for real, this is the point in time, once we have that attack model done, that we're going to start building our scripts, right? We're going to either start writing some Python code, some C code, some JavaScript, whatever it's going to be that we need to use based on that attack model is what we're going to start doing. And we're also going to start determining other payloads we can use or execute. Is there malware we can employ? What other weapons can we bring against this target? Now remember, for keyboard to keyboard, the K2K stuff, we're not going to, once we launch this, we're not going to be very quiet. One of our key goals is going to ultimately be to keep you, the defender, engaged in this attack as long as we care for, or as long as we need to. So it's going to be a pretty serious onslaught, right? Our attack violence and velocity is going to be really high, very fast moving, and a lot of violence, right? So we're going to right now start figuring out how we're going to bring down the pain, right? This is what we're doing at this point. So one of the things that I think is important from a defender perspective right now is everything I just talked about up to this point, all the OSI stuff, doing showdown searches, checking out Glassdoor, looking for password dumps, all of that stuff is stuff that I would recommend you try to do. I know it's hard. It's not difficult to do it. The amount of time it takes is the challenge, right? But you should try to find a way to do it once a year, maybe, or hopefully a little more frequently. You can hire some third parties. I will be honest with you. I don't know of any third party that's 100%. But these are one of those cases where something is better than nothing. So if you can have a third party who's scouring the internet for you and looking for these types of things, but you really need to ask them. And one of the challenges I have with a lot of the third parties who do kind of monitor the internet for you is they don't typically disclose their sources. I'd like to see, like, show me all the sources you're actually investigating. not just, well, that's proprietary, we got super sleuth algorithms and blah, blah, blah. You know, I found companies, I'll give you an example, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, you know, where you have organizations that are monitoring the dark web, and yet all your data isn't even dumped to the dark web, it's dumped to Pastebin. And they're not monitoring Pastebin, but you're paying them to monitor the dark web because we think that's where all these transactions take place. And frankly, no, there's a lot of data and stuff that's dumped on the regular web, right? The non-dark web, light web. And so you need to think about if you're going to contract a third party to monitor open source intelligence for you, make sure that they're not just doing the dark web, but they're also looking at other things like Glassdoor and social indicators and things of that nature. So hopefully that is one takeaway, is you can do everything we just talked about and determine, you know, do you have a large open source intelligence challenge that may lead to somebody being able to attack you from that perspective. So I want to talk a little bit about threat modeling. I don't know how familiar people are with this. I'm a huge fan. Now, on the attacker side, as I mentioned, we would do an attack model. Very similar to this, we would just be looking at it from kind of a little bit different perspective, but mostly these are the same. Now, for those of you that are, hopefully there's some of you on here that are fans of Batman, this is a real easy way to start understanding threat modeling. Now, before we get into this, one of the suggestions I will give you, this is something you can do on your own. It is also something that instead of maybe doing a tabletop simulation or bringing a third party in like us, I mean, we love doing tabletops, we think we're pretty good at them, or doing a pen test, maybe take some of those funds and invest it in a threat model. But you can do this yourself, and I encourage you to do these on your own, but like with anything else, it's always good to get some third party at some point to kind of maybe hopefully help you take things to a new level. But these are easy to do, and I recommend doing them, like I said, when I'm teaching like writing secure code classes for medical device manufacturers, I encourage them to get people in a room together. Again, that's hard to do nowadays, but order a bunch of pizza and do this over an hour or two. You don't have to do this for a full day. And ultimately, you're going to look at your environment. So if we go back to what's on the screen and the Batman thing, Batman has on the left-hand side of the screen a bunch of assets, right? The Batcave is the most important asset. We need to stack rank these, right? So we look at the assets on the left-hand side, and we use like an asset value 1 to 5. The Batcave for Batman would be asset value 5, right? This is the most important thing that has to be protected. Alfred, probably an asset value maybe 3 or 4, you know, pretty important. He knows a lot. So maybe, you know, second important thing to protect. Then maybe emails and text messages are like asset value 2. But, you know, you can stack rank those. Point is, in your environment, you're going to figure out your key assets and stack rank them. And then you're going to think about, in the second column, what you have in place to protect these things. And you're going to, whatever it is, right? The antivirus, endpoint, security operations, security orchestration, host intrusion detection, honeypots, network intrusion detection, you know, honey tokens, whatever it is you have. And then, you know, the last piece of this is, what are your threats, right? What are the things that are going to be an issue for you? Now, as an attacker, if I'm doing offensive computing, that would be where I'm thinking about my tools, my weapons, right? So in this case, we have the police are a threat to Batman, the Joker, and journalists, right? And what we do is, you can see the different lines. A dotted line is a low risk, right, of somebody, that vector, that threat actually getting to a piece of information. So, for example, the police finding the Batcave, very low risk. Second thing is medium risk, right? We see that the Joker getting to the Batcave, kind of a medium risk, right? And then the highest risk is the thick lines. So, you know, one of the concerns here is that the Joker could get past everything and get to Alfred. Now, when we think about it, if he did get to Alfred, the big problem is that Alfred knows where the Batcave is and all of our other secrets, and that could be a big issue. So maybe Alfred's value, maybe we need to think of Alfred as a high value target and not just asset value 4. Right now, there's a little secret sauce I'm going to share with you. Asset valuation and high value targets are something we created several years ago. And the reason you use those is asset values are your view of what's important, and high-value targets are the attacker's view of what's important. In this case, the Joker probably would see Alfred as a high-value target. Now, what happens here is you start putting this together is it's basically a game, and this is where you know, in the olden days, we could sit around with pizza or something, or chicken parms or meatball parms, and kind of have a conversation about, okay, you know, if you were the Joker, how would you get to Alfred? What would you need to get past? What pieces of our security? And as you go through that, you'll have a conversation about, well, I would try this. And you'd say, no, you can't do that because we have blah, blah, blah in place. But eventually you're going to find holes in that protection scheme. As we've seen, the Joker has a high probability of getting to Alfred. So the next thing we would do here is figure out, how do we stop the Joker? What security do we have to put in place to reduce that risk? We may not be able to fully eliminate it, but how do we get that hopefully down to a dashed line? So it's a pretty powerful tool. If you haven't done this before, I think a lot of people learn it if you're going through like a CISP program or something like that, but then we don't actually use it. And I think the proper way to use it is more as a game than really a kind of like in-depth 6-month project. It's something you should be doing maybe quarterly, get together with people and play around with threat modeling. And we're going to go through some others. These can get very sophisticated. So I'm giving you a silly example to hopefully illustrate how to do this. But obviously that can get much, much more complex. But point is, try them. This is a little bit more serious threat model where we have, you could see the threats, the high-risk threats, vulnerabilities are modeled in this. We have our defenses listed out pretty well. And then we have our critical assets on the left-hand side of the screen, right? So a little bit more kind of in line with our day-to-day life. But again, this is very high level. And this is probably where, you know, I would tell you if you were doing a lunch and learn and kind of your own thing, you probably want to get to this level at a minimum. You can make it much more complicated. I'll show you some others. But you're trying to balance having fun with the ability to walk away with some key tasks like, hey, we got to go fix these 2 or 3 things, or we really need to address those 1 or 2 things or strengthen those 1 or 2 things because we're trying to keep the Joker out. So here's a little bit more traditional threat model. This is something that probably if I was doing a class, we would get into, and trust boundaries and overlapping boundaries and you know, different access control paths and social engineering. And another good way to do this, which I don't have here, is taking the MITRE attack framework and overlaying that and trying to figure out what pieces of the attack framework you have deployed versus what are susceptible to risks and what those risks could mean to a critical asset. But this is a little bit more in-depth threat model, if you will. And these can get very, very complicated. You know, this one here is really looking at a high-level distributed architecture. We can look at one that's really gets even further, where we're starting to look at protocol and traffic levels. And you can do different ones different ways, right? You can do a high-level one quarter, and a much more deep one, or maybe you bring in a third party. And yes, we do them. So selfish plug that if you want to play around with this and you need help, we're happy to do that with you. But just hopefully wanted to expose this because in the K2K side, if we were launching an actual attack, we'd be doing this slightly different from the attacker's perspective. So I figured if I mentioned it for the attacker, we should spend a little bit of time about how you can use this as a defender to help improve your security posture in a pretty economical and hopefully fun way if you don't get too carried away with it. And which is probably one of the biggest mistakes I see people do, is they get way too academic with it. And you can do this and all these color coding and boundaries. But if you haven't done it before, just start here, or kind of start here and make it real simple on yourselves. Have some fun. You will find things. You're always going to find something. And then at some point graduate to much more sophisticated models. All right, so back to K2Ks. So we have a bunch of data now, right? And this is important that we understand. The open source intelligence we brought back in, we're going to start categorizing. We're going to do some data mining. Now this is something that started with K2Ks and we've seen now applied to especially ransomware. This is kind of, K2Ks are kind of rare, but a lot of the stuff that people learned in doing keyboard to keyboard attacks, these are more advanced attacks again, is trickled down to, your more intermediate attacker, right? They've learned from what the more advanced attackers did carrying out K2Ks. And one of the things was data mining. And one of the things we've seen with ransomware over the past 2 years is really starting to mine the data and not having to exfiltrate it. And I'm not going to go into all that, but you don't even have to exfiltrate the data. You can mine it in place within your organization. But what we're looking for is no surprise: financial data, patient data, social data, and VIP data, right? We're trying to determine, is there anything in there that's valuable? Now, I want you to understand that the data that we're looking for here is not because we're looking to sell the data, right? And in fact, it's kind of interesting. A lot of the selling of data due to ransomware being so successful is not as much as you would think anymore. So we're trying to find data that provides us a leverage, and that leverage is either against your employees or your patients, right? So think about what we're trying to get to here in terms of a K2K. We're trying to pull off a very rapid, massive attack, and it would be helpful if we had some people in your organization that could help us pull off that attack. What's the best way to go get them to cooperate with us? Well, really kind of anything we can do to leverage, right? One source of leverage is always financial. Maybe they're having challenges with the rate of inflation and gas prices these days, and we can offer them some kind of monetary compensation. Two is we can leverage some type of embarrassing situation. And one of them, would be that their patient data shows they have an STD or a mental illness. I'll come back to the adult websites in a moment. But this also works with patients, right? And this also is very effective with ransomware attacks. And we've seen this actually occur very well with ransomware, where the hospital says, I'm not paying. And the attackers go, oh, okay. And they start calling your patients. And they especially focus with patients, unfortunately, that have some form of mental illness, right? Somebody's been admitted for depression, possibly suicide or suicidal thoughts, and then if they've been admitted for some type of addiction or rehabilitation related to drugs or alcohol, STDs. The idea here is the attackers are using the data, they're doing data mining to figure out how can they create that leverage. Now, I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about adult websites because I think this is important to understand. It gets us back to password dumping. One of the things that we found is several years ago, there was an organization we were doing pen testing for. When we do pen testing, we do a lot of open source stuff. And so we try to replicate what an attacker would do. And so part of what we do, if we have the time and the client gives us the time, is we go do a full open source investigation. And in this one instance, when we went out, we found that this hospital had, I think there was a dump of an adult website. There was a website out there that got breached, an adult website that got breached, and all the users of that website were actually, their user ID and passwords were dumped to Pastebin. Now again, I mentioned this a little bit, but I'm trying to create some context for you. So everybody's user ID and password for this adult website was on Pastebin. Pastebin is not dark web. It's easy to get to, and it's usually really a treasure trove of information. So what happened is we found that there were 220 employees from this one single hospital who were all part of, had membership on this adult website. Now, the big challenge, the question that always comes up is, how did you know that these people were employees of this hospital? I wish I could tell you, well, we did a lot of data mining and we ran it through these super cool algorithms and we were able to, link up people's internet movements and patterns, and that's how we figured it out. We didn't do any of that. What happened is the employees were actually using their hospital email account as their user ID in this adult website, and their user and their password for their hospital account, for their work account, on this website. Now, the reason we know that is because we were able to take some of the user ID and passwords, and as part of our pen test, we logged into their VPN using what we found on Pastebin. Now, at first, this sounds kind of funny, and it's like, oh my gosh, how can anybody do that? I want you to go back to the number and realize this is 220 plus people, all from a single organization. And so when you think about that mathematically, it kind of starts to lend itself to the fact that despite best efforts with security awareness, we need to think about the fact that our users sometimes just really do not so intelligent things, right? All of us would probably say, my gosh, why would you ever use your work email address to do something like that? Like, that's just ridiculous. You're just asking for trouble. And hopefully some of us are like, why would you even ever go to a website like that, right? But point is, I'm trying to illustrate to you that when we're setting up a K2K attack or any kind of attack, ransomware, whatever else we're trying to do, when we're trying to leverage people, right? Because that's what we're trying to do here. This is a great way to leverage them. Because obviously, if you're using your work account, there's probably other people in your life that you're trying to not let know what you're doing. And so we would leverage that as part of this. And maybe we would ask you to drop some kind of bots, or maybe get us some information, and we'll make sure that this information doesn't get to anybody that you would care about it. Now, that's one piece. Remember also the other things. If you're a board of director, if you're somebody in the town that you serve in or city you serve in, and it could be detrimental for people to find out you had an STD or you had some kind of an addiction problem. These could be a lot of things that help us leverage you helping us carry out our attack. So that's how kind of all this comes together, and why I wanted to take a minute or so to kind of talk through this. Okay, and we've already talked about the idea here is not to sell the data. So in order to pull off this attack, one of the things we kind of need is some type of cloud-based system that allows us to generate the attacks from multiple origins that we can control, right? So we want a distributed network. The cloud is great for this. Unfortunately, and I don't know how many of you know this or not, there are a bunch of cloud-based hosters that allow you to be completely anonymous. And we can spin up VMs, we can spin up Kubernetes instances, Docker instances, all kinds of things, and launch attacks. And we can do that both here throughout the US or remotely overseas. But the idea here is getting compute power in order to facilitate a K2K attack is not that hard. Now, K2K attacks sometimes are mistaken for denial of service attacks. And we're not ultimately really trying to push out a denial of service here. We're not going to use a big, massive botnet, right, to flood you with traffic. What we're really trying to do ultimately is take you away from your job and engage you in some form that ultimately distracts you. If we really want to kind of up the ante, the best way to do this is we attack your partners, your trading partners, your business associates, and others, and we pivot from there because we have the added advantage of you trusting probably those connections. So hopefully what you're seeing is we're layering this up. Now here's some of when we execute this attack, what we're going to do is we're going to try and move very fast, and we're going to keep at it for about 48 to 72 hours. On average, it's about 56 hours on average that once the attack starts, it'll continue. And so I want to be real clear that this is an ongoing loud attack. Like, we're going to be doing crazy stuff to your firewall. We're going to be trying to get to your VPN. We're going to be trying to deface your web portal. We're going to try to, lock down or compromise your patient portal. We're going to go after your physician portals. We're going to try to disrupt your communication with, health exchanges. We're going to try to, everything we can possibly do, because we've just spent, months putting together an attack model. We're going to come at you with, and it's going to be minute by minute by minute over a period of about 72 hours, as I said, typically 56. And this is why, when I mentioned earlier, defense contractors have or had at some point K2K response teams, it's because of this, because you have to be thinking about the fact that this is a 24-hour day and night onslaught of events against you. And the attackers have the resources, and most of them are human, that are sitting up day and night launching attack after attack after attack. So some of you will say, well, let's air gap. We kind of talked about that earlier. And you can, right? It's one viable defense. We're going to talk more about it a bit, but I want to let you know also that we have seen situations where, the attackers did get in, they staged stuff like we talked about in the low and slow stuff in the last session, and now you have a situation where the attacks are occurring internally as well as externally. So even if you air gap, you may still have a challenge with the attack occurring internal to your organization. Obviously, once they lose connectivity, that might be a little bit easier to deal with, but again, it's pretty disruptive, right? The idea here typically is to distract you, and the question really is distract you from what? And there's no answer to that because we don't know why the attackers are coming after you if they launch this type of attack. And you know, for defense contractors, it may be that they're attempting to exfiltrate data that they don't want anybody to know was exfiltrated. You know, and typically that's probably going to be it, right? So the other thing that makes this really hard to defend against is that humans are involved. And so we can kind of think about a lot of different alternatives, and as you defend yourself, figure out different things we can do to you. You know, I like this GIF because if you ever did experience a K2K, it's probably looks like this GIF. Though these GIFs I don't really like because they made everybody think like there was some big button in the world that everybody pushes. But the point of this GIF is that it is a lot of noise and violence and velocity coming at you all at one time, and that's what you're trying to defend against. So how do you survive this? Pre-testing your environment. You know, if you're going to gap, is that's going to be your go-to defensive strategy, if that's what you decide, then you know, make sure you practice gapping. You know, literally turn off the environment. One of the things we see when we respond to ransomware attacks that's a challenge for a lot of people is that they go to paper as part of a test, but that test lasts maybe 2 or 3. I've seen the most, I think, is 4 hours. Like if you're going to test air gapping, you need to kind of air gap for 72 hours straight. And I don't know many hospitals that'll do that. But I will tell you, if you don't do that, if you ever do have to air gap for real, you're probably going to learn a lot of stuff the hard way and realize like we got to go back online. So if you're going to try air gapping, please go test it for real and see what breaks, what doesn't break, what works, what doesn't work. You may be surprised on some of the things. I know of a hospital somewhere on the East Coast that lost internet connectivity and their HVAC system went out. It overheated and the entire hospital lost AC, like the entire hospital, and not just for a day. They lost air conditioning for close to 7 days. Which was a massive scramble for them. So you never know what's going to, and the reason was the HVAC systems couldn't connect back home, and there was a fault of some form, and it shut down the AC systems. So just crazy stuff happens with your air gap. Your ISP as a support is a critical asset in this. So you should have great communications with your ISP. One thing I would tell you to do now is call your ISP or whoever's responsible for that relationship and ask them, what is your emergency number? Like if I have a situation like this or a DDoS attack or something, the fastest way to air gap is their ISP to help support that gapping. Also, they typically have the tools in place to prevent DDoS and things like that. But if you don't have the emergency number, which is not the number posted on the web for support or whatever their support number may be, you need to find that out. Like, what is the super secret emergency number we call? And we're not going to be put in a queue, right? And we're not going to be asked for our credit card so we can upgrade our support agreement, which is something we saw happen to one hospital when they tried to do this. So you need to talk to your ISP and say, look, if this were to happen, what then? Like, how do we get your help, and how do we get it quickly? Because we've got minutes here, not hours. Security automation, really critical aspect here, right? You're dealing with a bunch of humans coming at you, and the challenge for you is going to be how do you respond quickly to this, right? And so orchestration is a big part of this. And you know, obviously for us, we would recommend you looking at our orchestration tools, Nightingale Orchestrator. So anyway, hopefully this is helpful from your perspective and to go from there. So I want to talk about a couple things that are in my toolkit, things I'm playing with. I figured I'd add them to this presentation. This is a little bit beyond K2K, but hopefully it wraps everything up for us. So if you haven't heard of a product called Plugbot, I'm a huge fan of Plugbot. You can get it online, it's free. I don't know if it's maintained anymore or not. I use my own copy of it and maintain it on my own. But all you see on here on the screen on the right-hand side is the UI for Plugbot. And what you do is you bring up Plugbot on a server, and you can do this on any server that you have you control, right? So it could be a server in my house, it could be an Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, or some third-party private cloud. And it's a pretty cool, slick interface. It's pretty easy to do. Now, what happens is with Plugbot, on the left-hand side of the screen here, you see like a Raspberry Pi. That's actually a case for a Raspberry Pi. And you load some code onto that Raspberry Pi. It takes about a few minutes. And then you have to, this is the drawback to Plugbot, but it's cool once you get past this drawback, because you have to have physical access, right? So typically when we're doing this with Plugbot, we have an operative go in and they pretend they're visiting a patient, or they just get past security and they find a Cat5 connection or Cat6, and they just plug the they plug the Raspberry Pi into that network jack and power it up. It can also run off batteries if it has to. But as soon as that thing gets plugged in, and unless you have network access control in place, it will call home to that server, and it'll show up on this dashboard. And at that point, we can add it in. We do other kinds of cool stuff, like we can add applications, right? An application can be anything I want that bot to run. So it could be a PowerShell script, it could be Python, it could be JavaScript, it could be Java, it could be C, C++, whatever I want it to run. Can run, and so I can add a bunch of applications. Like in this case, you'll see there's an Nmap scanner. So I now have a computer that I control inside your network, and whatever network access control or lack thereof you have is what's going to allow me to move through your network, and I can start running Nmaps or doing a whole bunch of other stuff. And so I can go ahead and I can also download files, so I can download anything I want. And the bot on that Raspberry Pi will go ahead and unzip and launch that application for me. And I can have multiple applications running. And then what I can do is when I'm managing those jobs, I can get output. So it's interactive, right? I can see information from your network. I can start scanning your network. So again, the biggest challenge here is how do I get on your network? But the easiest, and if I'm dedicated to this, it's easy enough to get physical access. But it's a pretty cool thing. I keep playing with it. I thought I'd share it with you guys because I think a lot of times we forget that physical security is a key component to our overall security strategy. And this has been really successful for us when we go and do physical security testing and internal pen tests and red teaming. So just something to think about. There's a cool dashboard. So it's a really well put together product. It is used typically in the electrical industry. What happens is you break into like an electric substation, you drop in a blood pot, and then you can start taking control of that critical infrastructure. So it's used a lot in critical. It's free. It's open source. You can mess with it. So the second thing that I'm playing with and has been around for a while is this concept of polymorphic attacks. Polymorphic attacks are simply stated, they're viruses that can change, right? So they change, and the way they work is you have this virus that gets deployed to your computer. And the reason I'm bringing it up is the last sentence in this slide, which is pretty much all viruses today have polymorphism capabilities. And I was hoping to get everybody to understand what this is, so when you're talking to your antivirus vendor, you can ask them about it, and they're not going to snow you by just saying yes, yes, yes. You can say, well, tell me how you guys do this. How do you detect polymorphic viruses? So polymorphic viruses, what they have is a mutation engine. And there's the body of the virus, the main kind of virus body. And what we do is, typically is antivirus is going to be scanning and looking for that virus body. Now, while it's doing that, every time this runs, literally every time it runs, not just the first time it's deployed to your network or downloaded, but every time that virus gets executed. Now, this is the part that you need to talk about with your antivirus vendor is, are you guys only detecting it on download? Or are you able to detect polymorphism every time it executes? Like literally, if I put this thing on 50 different computers, are you going to alert on all 50, or just the first computer that downloaded it? And a lot of the vendors do polymorphic detection, but it's only on the first system that downloads it. And if you don't detect it there, you're in trouble. So it's looking over here at the virus body. It's typically looking for some type of signature or behavior. What happens when this runs, immediately upon running, before it takes any action on anything, it goes ahead and it uploads itself to the mutation engine. The mutation engine is also running on your system, but it has some countermeasures. That mutation engine decrypts that virus body, and then it sucks back in that code, and it makes a little bit of mutations, and it re-encrypts it. So what happens is, the antivirus is looking where the magnifying glass is, but you're being attacked by the virus that's actually been mutated. And that's what polymorphism is, right? It's the ability to change so that it can not be detected, right? Because you're looking for one thing, but it actually now looks like another thing. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. I've been playing with polymorphism for years now, and it's gaining even more traction in not just viruses, but in some other areas of malware. My big holy grail professionally is genetic algorithms. And so we've been starting to see very lightweight movement in genetic algorithms. So I'm not going to go too deep into this. At the bottom of the screen, there's something called Chema Atlantis, which is a company I used to own long ago. We developed and designed the first distributed intelligent agent platform. So I started taking some of the work we did there with this concept of genetic algorithms. So for those of you that don't know what genetic algorithms are, just simply stated, we take a bunch of code, an initial population, we throw it against a problem, right? How do I run Nmap without being detected? I have 10 different ways to try that. One of those succeeds, and or some of them get further than the other attempts, and those continue to live, and we kill off the ones that didn't do so well in this problem-solving challenge. So the idea here is, again, we start with a population, we throw it at a problem, and whatever survives or comes close to surviving, it then becomes part of our go-forward population, and we keep doing that until we learn enough that we find a way to bypass defenses. So we just kind of evolution, right? It's kind of Darwinism is basically what happens here at a very simple level. So they're very powerful. Genetic algorithms and polymorphism together become a very dangerous set of arsenals. So I started thinking about, well, could I do something or start bringing all this stuff together? So from an offensive computing standpoint, this is kind of what I think about and play with outside of my life at Sensato. And one of the things I'm playing with is this concept of Chuckybots, right? Where we take kind of the plug bot concept, but instead of having to go on site, we find another way to get those things there, but I can manage a multitude of bots. Now, these are not botnets like DDoS stuff. These are very intelligent bots. They kind of look like this. We have a recon bot. That recon bot has the ability to intelligently, right? We're not telling the recon bot to do this. We can throw the recon bot at a problem. And in this problem, it's your network on the right-hand side. So I could tell the recon bot, like, hey, go recon. And if we take all the lessons we've learned today about K2K and open source and all the other things, we know this recon bot is going to probably go launch 2 other bots automatically. And one of those bots is an open source intelligence bot, which is going to start scouring the cloud and trying to start learning all about you, right? What password dumps there are, showdown, search results, all of those things. And then we have an Nmap bot, which is a little bit sillier and more to the point, but it's going to start Nmapping your server. But we could have other bots, like maybe you have some kind of defense or detection mechanism for Nmap. So this dude doesn't survive, but other dudes come on the scene, right? And one of these dudes will probably survive, right? So they're looking at configurations or maybe how to do logins, right? So we're starting to apply the concept of geneticism to our bots, right? And once these guys are kind of done with their job, we have a data mining bot. We talked about data mining before and how we can use that to leverage individuals to maybe work on our behalf to help us with our attacks. We can also use that to model the actual attacks that we want to carry out ultimately. At this point, all we've done is reconnaissance, right? Intelligence gathering. So the data mining bot talks to a mentor. Now mentors, way back in the day when I was doing intelligent agent work, what mentors do is basically they have a wealth of knowledge and they're able to evaluate conditions of state and then translate that into a set of tasks and actions. So the mentor bot kind of talks to the data mining bot, and it spawns off these 2 variants, Gen A and Gen A1. They're basically the same, but slightly different. And mentor bot tells them, hey, you 2 go off and see if you can break into this server. And they do. They try to go off, and each one of them is going to try to, based on all the recon that we did and the analysis, going to break into this server, which is your server. And then one of them will not be successful, right? Now, again, I'm using 2 bots here, Gen 1, A and A1. We could have A through A1000, right? It doesn't matter. We just spawn them up, and each one's a little different. And some will be better than others, and we'll score them. And eventually, one of them will be the one that we put our chips on. So in this case, Gen A1 is the one that we decide, hey, you made it pretty close to getting in there. Maybe you did get in. So at this point, we need to be worried about detection. So the mentor bot learns what Gen A1 did, and it ups the ante by creating a Generation B. Now, Generation B has all the goodness of Gen A and A1 and all the meaning, but it's now a little bit more powerful. So this is where the genetic algorithms take an even higher stance in this. And then ultimately they try to break in, and Gen B is successful, right? And so at that point, we now upgrade Gen B to a polybot, meaning this bot is now polymorphic. So even if you have defenses to try and detect the bots, at this point, once they breach your defenses, they're going to become polymorphic in nature, just like we talked about with the viruses. And so at this point, he's inside. And then all these other bots kind of do a crazy little dance because they've been successful and they figured out a way to get in. So that's kind of my prediction of where K2K goes, and kind of probably over the next, I'd say 2 to 3 years, maybe we'll start seeing more of this. But you can say, hey, I heard it here first. So that weird Gomez dude was talking about this stuff and Rosie wasn't sure what he was saying, but now I'm scared. All right, so with that, just some reminders and get out of here. This Thursday at August 11th at 2 p.m. we're doing our final medical device security 3-part series. If you haven't registered for that, you're welcome to join. There'll be a link in the chat room for you to get there, or you can email us at info@sensado.co. Once you register, you'll get all the first 2 parts of the series, and if you can't make it on Thursday, you'll get the recording for the 3rd part. This Thursday, we're going to be going deep into tactical incident response and medical devices and patient safety. We've gotten a really great feedback on that, so if you haven't had a chance to listen to those recordings, please register and we'll get you the recordings. As always, we'd love to work with you guys. We do HIP assessments, maturity modeling, incident response, tabletops, threat modeling. There's a variety of things we do for virtual CISO and virtual cybersecurity analysts. So if you have opportunity for us to get to know you and ultimately, hopefully earn your trust, please let us know. We also have the industry-leading medical device security program, and we have our security as a service program known as CAS, which is a full out-of-the-box cybersecurity platform. So with that, if there's anything we can do for you, please feel free to reach out, whether it's to me directly or my team at info@sensado.co. Hopefully today was eye-opening in some ways. Try to use something that maybe we're not going to see day to day, but help us start thinking about strategy and some other defensives that maybe we don't think about on our day-to-day lives. Again, if you have questions, I don't know, Laura, if there are any questions.
We don't have any questions at this time.
So with that, thank you so much, everybody. I truly hope it was a good use of your time. Look forward to our next time together. Bye-bye.